Before you say yes, have the conversation with your partner, with your sibling, with your family member. What happens if one of us gets sick? What happens if one of us is no longer able to pay? Have the conversation.
Before you say yes, take the time to make sure you've looked at the products, thought about whether this is the right thing for you. Just that little bit of extra time in almost any part of a financial transaction is time well spent to keep yourself that bit safer.
I'm Catherine Fitzpatrick, former senior bank executive, now working with companies, governments and regulators around the world to change the way financial products are designed. This podcast is about financial consent, what to check, what to ask before you share your money, your accounts and your digital life with someone you love. So before you say yes to a joint account, listen to this. Not many of us get to adulthood without a bank account. Whether you've started with a passbook or you're only ever used to using an app, bank accounts are part and parcel of every day. And usually they're pretty simple, pretty frictionless actually. Then you meet someone, you move in together, you join finances and life gets busy. It's easy to overlook simple account settings or terms and conditions that are really important down the track if life throws you a curveball. So today I'm starting at the end, when the curveball comes. By starting at the end, thinking about what if, we give ourselves an opportunity to set it up properly from the start. Rebecca Glenn is the founder of the Centre for Women's Economic Safety. She'll tell you the decisions couples make about whose name goes on what, from the bank account to the car rego to the insurance to the bills, are some of the most consequential they'll ever make. And most people make them without thinking about it at all.
The healthy money conversation is something that I think has the greatest preventative power, possibly, because it says, okay, you and I are two separate individuals. We have our own lives, but we're choosing to bring them together at this point. That doesn't mean we have to completely abandon our own financial identity. I think that's a really key proposition.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of older women who have managed the accounts in their house for a very long time by using the credit card. And it happens to be a credit card that is actually in their husband's name or their partner's name. And unfortunately, when they're widowed, they get told, sorry, you can't have a credit card anymore. It wasn't your credit card. That's right. Yeah. And so going in a bit eyes wide open, I think, is very helpful, but hard to do because, you know, young people are talking about consent when it comes to sex. What's my, how do I ask you for consent? What is it? How do I give it? How do I take it away? How do we keep negotiating? We're not having the same conversation about money.
I think it's been a big missed opportunity, the respectful relationships curriculum, talking about all of these things, but not talking about money. So, it is important, and it's important that we start having those conversations from a pretty young age. People are getting jobs, they're, sharing costs of a dinner. You're already a financial identity, in current society. So why not have those conversations from teens?
When people need to separate or change their financial arrangements, what makes it really complicated, and what is the thing that might surprise people about this is hard to do?
So my brain automatically goes to, it's really hard when someone's being obstructive, right? So when someone's being abusive, that's where the problems come. And you and I have talked about this, for many, many, many hours. Joint products are just so sticky, right?
Yeah. Because
joint products don't work unless both people are pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get to, as soon as there's abuse, someone's not. And that is all about exerting their power and control over the other person. So it doesn't even matter if there's a financial incentive for them to do the right thing. They need to show control. So obviously, having an obstructive person is the biggest challenge. But I think there are other challenges. There are, challenges where there's a mismatch between, one person's income and another person's income. And there might be an informal arrangement between a couple. Well, I'll pay for this, but you can pay for all of those things. Fair enough. We all manage our finances in couples in varying ways that make sense to us. But if it turns out that informal arrangement is, well, you pay the mortgage and I'll pay all of these bills, and actually what you have is, one liability in one person's name, and all of the informal things and someone else is taken care of, actually one person can be left with the liability.
Yeah.
So, I was taking responsibility for these things, but actually there's no, the groceries and all of the day-to-day expenses that, I can just stop tomorrow and someone else has got the bill in their name. So it's the joint accounts, but it's also then the accounts where, well, I'll put the rego in my name for the car, and that's fantastic. You're going to pay that. I'll have paid this other stuff. But if I then don't pay the rego, or someone doesn't pay the rego, but I'm driving the car, I'm the one who gets pulled over with invalid rego.
So how would you encourage people to look at that in the setup? Because that is it's really common that you might say, well, we'll just sort it out like this and not really pay a lot of attention to whose name is on what bill.
Yeah.
What would you be saying to them? Well, if you are setting it up, here's how you need to think about that.
One helpful lens can be, and I sort of touched on this a bit earlier, one helpful lens to look at this can be, what happens if one of us is in an accident? What happens if one of us is sick? What happens if one of us dies? Again, that's not something people like to look into either. But can I keep driving this car if you're sick or in a coma in hospital? Well, in the case where the rego's in that person's name, no. So maybe we need to think about, if it's the car that I drive, the rego should be in my name.
Yeah.
So is there an alignment between the actual way a product is being used and who has the responsibility on paper? That's one way to get into the nitty-gritty without going all the way to, you might abuse me one day.
Yeah. And, we're not trying to scare people about this too, but there are simple things you can do that are going to protect you regardless.
Yeah.
If someone's sick, if someone does die, awful, terrible, loses their job for a long period of time.
So the assumption is you get married or you move in together as life partners and you live happily ever after. And there's never a problem that when you want to make a change to the product, you both agree that that's in both of your best interest. And it simply isn't set up for a disagreement, for one party to think differently about a product, or for people to separate often, unless they both have each other's best interests at heart. And unfortunately, even where there hasn't been abuse in a relationship, when a relationship breaks down, things can get a lot more heated up. It's pretty common business practice to have the exit clause, which is, if both parties disagree, you will end this contract in this way.
Yeah.
Why isn't it the case with financial products?
It's so true. And I think about financial products not just as a bank account or a loan. I think about it as your energy bill, which is a credit product, your water bill, which is a credit product. Telco tends to be the same. Yeah, your phone or your internet.
Yep.
All of those things you are getting something that you have to pay a bill for later. And you're right, there is normally those exit clauses, but it feels like it's been a bit icky to step into that when we're in love. And so we surely cannot talk about that as a contract term. If you were to go back in time and you're with someone who's about to sign up to their bank account, they might have a joint bank account, or they're getting a loan together for the first time, or even they're just working out whose name's going to be on the electricity bill, or are both of them going to be on the electricity bill. What would you want them to understand at that moment?
Yeah, I think we would want people to ask, what is my liability with this product? We talked previously about illness and accident. What happens if? And I think if they understand that, then there's at least some options around, well, we should both be on that one, or alternatively not, if maybe one person has an income. There are different decisions that people are going to make. And so what I'd be really keen to see is providers providing more options. So whether that is, a term and condition that allows for, look, if both parties can't agree, then this product is just going to be ended, null and void. I think that would give people options where they could have a conversation to say, that sounds like something we want to go in for. I think the game-changing piece of the last, decade has really been the manner in which smartphones have become our everything. We've supported at the money clinics recently young women who, while they were sleeping, their partner used their phone to take out a personal loan. The money was taken out of their accounts by their partner before they even realised they had a loan. And it's just so easy now. If you have a few pieces of personal information about someone and their smartphone, that's all you need. Yeah. And unfortunately, while the financial institutions have really upped their game around frauds and scams, in this case, this young woman went to the bank and said what had happened. The fraud team investigated, said she hadn't reported her phone stolen. IP address says she's right here. So no can do, we can't help. So I think the sophistication around frauds and scams, it's about how do we bring that, and I agree it is a much more complex issue, but how do we start to become more sophisticated about what is happening, particularly in intimate partners, but it could also be obviously, a sibling, a carer, a family member. I think that's where we've got to look at.
The money conversation is something that keeps coming up again and again. But these conversations usually involve two people with emotions in a relationship, and let's be honest, it's complex. On the one hand, you've got your bank. We all know they're slightly serious, less emotional, and the thousands of words in their terms and conditions make it really complicated. But banks have a role to play when life gets tricky. Simon Birmingham is the CEO of the Australian Banking Association, the peak body for Australia's banks and custodian of the Banking Industry Code of Practice. He knows what the code says your bank will do for you and what it can't do, no matter how much you may need it to. I really want to dive into parts of the code. I know it's got specific sections in it that talk about joint accounts and what consumers can expect of their banks when they're going to start having a joint account.
That's right. Joint accounts, of course, by their very name and title, indicate what it is, and people step into that always, usually, hopefully, thinking the best in terms of what they're signing on to, and in doing so, thinking that there is a joint access and joint pathways, and that is accurate. There are also, because it is joint, then legal provisions that apply in terms of what can or can't be done by individuals. Joint accounts are legally held as joint accounts. Each individual has rights under those joint accounts, and that means that there are many things that banks cannot do just because one person asks without necessarily seeking the authority of the other person, which is why very sensitive and careful conversations are needed when things do go wrong and somebody is seeking help in those circumstances.
I've been talking a lot recently about joint and several liability. People think I get very nerdy because I really like terms and conditions, and I've spent far too long reading people's terms and conditions, but I don't think a lot of people really understand what that construct is in a contract, that it means both people are on the hook for a loan 100%. A lot of people think they're getting a loan, it might be 50-50 or something. So that's been an interesting conversation to me about joint accounts. So you talked about the code says here's what banks can and can't do, say if somebody wants to exit a joint account because relationships change and circumstances change. What does the code say about changing those joint arrangements?
So you can't just walk in and say, I want to exit an account, take half the money with me, and I want you to do it without any engagement with the other person. It's unfortunately, in terms of those difficult circumstances, the case that those legal rights, those legal obligations create a set of circumstances where banks need to go through certain steps to uphold their legal responsibilities. The code tries to provide the basis for them to make clear what those legal responsibilities are in terms of where they do need to get joint authority, but also, and especially when it then comes to the type of guidance that's provided to banks, how bank staff should actually engage with people to do that sensitively and in a way that is trying to achieve the best possible outcome that can meet the reasonable needs and wants of somebody who's making a request while upholding those legal frameworks. The advice about how that can be done, of course, how existing credit arrangements or other things will impact on that, and making sure that people understand perhaps the transition steps that might be necessary. And it can happen in all manner of circumstances. We're focused on perhaps the hardest of circumstances being those of family and domestic violence and abuse. But equally, older couples and circumstances where a credit card might be in the primary name of, usually, historically, the man, having conversations about, well, what will that mean? How do we manage those finances? Far more easily done before you're bereaved or in those circumstances of separation.
I'm glad you raised that as an example. It's one that I talk about all the time, actually, because most people will know a widow where they've then been told, what do you mean I don't have a credit card anymore? I've been using this credit card for years. But actually it was their husbands. And I say it's widows and husbands because that's what you hear about. And the data does show that that's how it works. And they're really surprised by that and then maybe can't get another credit card later. It's an issue that I would really like banks to fix.
I hope we can work through it. It's front of mind because, to be perfectly honest, probably as we're sitting here right now, I think my mum is in the bank, having told me she was going to go in today. Stepfather, her husband, in aged care, knowing it will come at some point.
Yeah.
And is in exactly that circumstance where the cards are all historically in his name.
Yeah. And it's why I'm doing this podcast too, to help people think about what are these circumstances, not necessarily about financial abuse, because it could be someone is ill or they're sick or they pass. But also there's been a lot of work in banking about fraud and scams and detecting those and preventing those. And I think a lot of the safer design and the monitoring that banks do may also apply to financial abuse because the tactics are quite similar. Why is it that banks have said we need to do something about domestic and family violence and financial abuse?
Because banks have recognised that joint accounts, financial instruments, loans, deposits, all of those things that become ever more entangled in relationships can be used as weapons, and that in using them as weapons, that can be inflicting trauma in a whole manner of different ways. And this is where the complexity between sometimes what the law says in all of those joint circumstances versus what the circumstances actually are is a difficult point. So guidelines have been developed to try to help navigate a pathway for banks and for staff and institutions through those difficult sets of circumstances. And tragically, we've seen things like the weaponization of messages on account transfers, as well as the threats around what people will or won't do with assets and finances that people have. So it can manifest itself in a whole range of ways.
I think it's a really critical but hidden role that a bank might play to support somebody. But what other support could bank staff provide if you needed to go and get some help?
So bank staff can provide assistance and referral. And so the expectations on bank staff in terms of the way in which they are honest about what can and can't be done, that they are compassionate in the way they go about that, but also the options that they can present in terms of how people may be able to act within their rights to establish some of their own financial assets or products. So there are in the guidelines expectations for banks in terms of the conversations that can be had in confidence, in terms of protecting certain information that people may share in relation to localities and those things that are sensitive to obviously a circumstance of potential violence, harassment, threats or intimidation. And so making sure that staff are aware, appropriately trained, and that really goes, of course, to how to engage with a bank. And not everybody's going to be able to have the right conversation with the right person the first time. And so going into to as best you can outline the circumstances and why you are trying to exit an account or change in arrangements, and making sure that you're then asking who is the right person to talk to, and getting the person on the end of the phone, at the end of the chat line if you'd rather type a message and don't feel like talking to somebody, or the teller across the counter, making sure that they're understanding that you want to make sure you're speaking to somebody who understands, is trained, is skilled, and is able to help you. Sometimes that will be the first person you talk to, but sometimes it will be a case that because of the complexity, it's better that a specialist gets involved.
I would encourage lots of people to control F in their terms and conditions and look for the words financial abuse, because Australia's the first country in the world to have made it really clear in their product terms for customers that if you misuse our products for financial abuse, there'll be consequences. Banks are the biggest adopters of those terms. How do you think that has come about, and why are banks so keen to support such an initiative?
There's a responsibility banks have to their customers and to society generally, but also to their frontline staff and others to try to get these things right and to respond to increased awareness and knowledge. And the reality is the understanding of financial abuse and, of course, of family and domestic violence overall is far greater today than it was in years gone by. If you can get the terms and conditions and the product design better, then you can harm minimise before you've actually got the problem.
My takeaway from Beck and Simon: the word joint is doing a lot of heavy lifting in most financial products, even the ones you don't think of as a financial product, like a bill from your energy or your water company. It sounds like equal, but it's not. It means both of you are responsible for all of that debt. And most products have been built on the assumption that the relationship lasts forever, and both of you always agree. Nobody told you that, but now you know. So before you say yes to a joint account, do this. Your phone is a bank. If someone has your phone and a few pieces of your personal information, they can take out a loan in your name even while you're asleep. Treat your phone and its financial apps like your wallet, your own PIN, your own credentials, and not shared. Keep a separate account in your own name, maybe even at a different institution. Your financial identity needs to be independent of your relationship. So think about your salary hitting your account first, and from there you're transferring it to shared accounts or to shared mortgages. But it starts with yours. If you need to talk to your bank about a joint account and something that might have gone wrong, ask for the right person. The person you reach out to may not be trained for complex situations. You can ask for someone who specialises in financial hardship or sensitive circumstances. And the banking code means your bank has obligations, confidentiality, compassion, and options. You're entitled to that conversation. This isn't about expecting the worst. It's about not being surprised by it, because love shouldn't cost you freedom.